We are live.
Welcome everyone to Connected Learning TV. This is the third webinar. Actually, it's more of a conversation than anything else of our January 2016 series titled Maker Ed, Tinkering, Inventing, Learning, which was organized by me, Howard Rheingold, and you can find out all about me at rheingold.com, R-H-E-I-N-G-O-L-D. I've been the host for the previous webinars this month, and we've got one more after this. They're on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We focus, because I'm really interested in it, on maker educators in schools, libraries, and after-school programs who are awakening and feeding interest in discovery, invention, and hands-on learning through new tools and practices. If you're watching this, please take a moment to share it with your networks. Today we're talking with AJ Almaguer, Lisa Brahms, Sherry Shi, Kylie Pepler, and maybe Luz Rivas, who's in transit, about how to get started with making learning and possibilities for where to take it in a very wide range of settings. Before we dive into our conversation, let's go over a couple quick details. To those watching live right now, we welcome comments and questions through either the Twitter hashtag #ConnectedLearning or the Q&A feature that you should see within the video player. We'll do our best to address your questions here in the Hangout. This is also being co-streamed at the National Writing Project's educatorinnovator.org. So before we begin, I'd like to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves and tell us about what you do and where you do it. So why don't we start with the person next to me in the little thumbnails, which is Sherry Shi. And remember to unmute yourself before you start talking.
Great, thank you, Howard. I am a senior researcher at a nonprofit called the Concord Consortium, and I have been working in K-12 and informal education for over 20 years, designing and researching how people learn with technology. Most recently, I helped start a makerspace at the Lawrence Hall of Science called the TechHive, and you'll be hearing more about that later.
Oh, good. Great. Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa, and I'm the Director of Learning and Research at Children's Museum of Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I helped to really start and spearhead MakeShop, which is our makerspace at the Children's Museum, which is really designed to support learning experiences through making for young children and families, as well as schools and teachers. And so yeah, it's been a really fun journey, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Wonderful. You can see we've got a great group here. Kylie?
Thank you, Howard. Yeah, so my name is Kylie Pepler, and I'm an Associate Professor of Learning Sciences here at Indiana University. And I'm also directing the Creativity Labs, where we've been doing a lot of research around making and leading an initiative called the Make to Learn initiative that's been sponsored by the MacArthur Foundation. That work has kind of brought us in contact with a lot of the National Writing Project, and we've produced like 4 curriculum volumes around making and trying to build this bridge between making and the curriculum. So it's been fun. We've been sort of specializing in e-textiles, or sort of wearable computers that can be sewn into clothing, and learning a lot about what this means for making and how we can make making more equitable, as well as foster like better learning over time.
So, you know, those of you who may see this later, all of the resources that our guests have at their disposal will be linked from the archive page. So we're hoping that this is going to help other people get started. AJ?
Thanks, Howard. My name is AJ Almaguer. I'm currently an independent maker and consultant down here in LA. But I was formerly the engineering educator of the TechHive with Sherry. Sherry hired me and my other colleague Matt, or I guess former colleague Matt Chilbert, 3.5 years ago when we got the TechHive up and running.
Okay, you know, I'm going to get around to asking you, on behalf of all of those who would like to start some kind of making learning space, some tips on getting started. But how about starting out by telling us about some of your favorite projects or moments in making that you've had over the last year?
Well, I can go ahead and get started. So I feel like we've done a lot of projects. So a little bit about the TechHive program. This is a youth development program at the Lawrence Hall of Science at UC Berkeley in California. And we have gone through at least 3 different rounds of different maker projects that started out as really huge projects, even down to kind of very simple projects. The project that I want to talk about today is one that we've started with using really simple cardboard boxes, pizza boxes or cereal boxes, to try to get people to start being very creative with paper in a project called Paper Mechatronics. We've designed some different activities where kids make animals and then through their own creativity add different electronics to them. So they learn some programming, they learn a little robotics, and they create an animal of their choice. And then as a collection, as each kid and team create an animal, they create this thing called a robot petting zoo. And thanks, AJ. And you know, AJ, you're welcome to share more about this. But it's been a really interesting way of starting making with really simple materials, kind of off-the-shelf things, starting at the point of creativity, and then also being able to share in a public space like a museum or even a school. And so it's sort of the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts, and it feels like a fun thing that one can scale pretty easily. I don't know, AJ, if you want to say a little bit more about that.
So I guess to backtrack a little bit, when we started the TechHive and we were looking up, you know, the principles of connected learning, you know, we talked about how we could be production-centered, yet have a shared purpose and like share the artifacts that our teams create to visitors. And I think the aha moment came when I realized that our museum wanted, you know, we were always looking for new ways to engage our visitors and to like showcase things. So that's when, you know, the idea of like having a little robot petting zoo, if you can see the little, came to me. What we did was we taught, you know, all our teens in the TechHive how to create, you know, little robotic animals. They were pretty simple animals that, you know, we used the Hummingbird Robotics kit, for example. It's a very good kit. And, you know, just simple part like cardboard boxes and art supplies. But the thing that we did was we made everyone, like the design challenge that we had was to create a robotic pet that you can interact with, that you can feed, like little pieces of paper, for example, and that would like live in this pen. And so we created this exhibit at the museum called the Robot Petting Zoo, and that where all the participants could showcase their robots, and it was really cute because then, you know, they got to see all the visitors enjoy the little robots, and that was a lot. And you know, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and also we tried to. It came from the idea of the kids when they came to us, especially some of the younger girls who mentioned that they were not exactly comfortable going to hackathons by themselves. And if there was another way that they could learn hacking in a non-competitive and safe environment, and that's sort of where the start of this idea came from, of being able to work collaboratively to do creative robotics, and still learn programming without having to develop something in sort of an overnight, kind of large, kind of hacker culture setting.
Yeah. So I guess with that sense, we created a Makeathon, which was like a friendlier version of a hackathon to kind of support this the robot making, and that's how we rolled out the robot petting zoo, or that's how we were able to build all the robots for the robot petting zoos, by hosting this Makeathon for all these beginner roboticists, or zookeepers we call them.
Yeah, I think this obsession with cardboard and paper is kind of, we're taking it also to try to do other things, so not just animals, but also trying to build up some different scientific instruments, or even venturing into mathematics. But starting with a very familiar material that kids and teachers have easy access to, that they can hack easily, they can decorate and fold. And it doesn't seem as far away. And so making can be really simple with just some paper and some materials.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, Kylie, you want to jump in?
Sure. So MakeShop, just to give like Sherry did with TechHive, MakeShop is a makerspace that's in our museum. And as an exhibit space and program in the museum, it's really open whenever the museum is open, and staffed whenever the museum is open. And so it's really a drop-in space where visitors can come for as short as 5 minutes to as long as 5 hours. And so just to give people a sense of what MakeShop really is as a learning environment. But the thing that I'm interested in talking about, and the most exciting thing for me that I've been involved in over the past year, has been this amazing collaboration with the Institute for Museum and Library Services to create a framework to assist museum and libraries in creating makerspaces for learning. So really helping with this wave of interest in making, helping museums and libraries across the country to create the conditions to support actual learning within their spaces, and kind of identify the essential elements of that and create workshops to help them design. So we started by going all across the country, visiting about 50 makerspaces and museums and libraries, and really understanding all of the essential ingredients, which, there were similarities to MakeShop and some real wonderful differences. Creating a base framework, and then creating some tools for discussion and case studies around the work that we did to help people engage with the framework. So now we're in the process of testing those tools and disseminating the work, and it's really been so gratifying to visit and talk with and see the work around making. There's no one way to make, and there's no one way to support the learning through making, and it's just been so gratifying to be a part of that process this year for me.
In regards to disseminating the work, are you going to have a URL or that we can pass along to people? Because, as I said, I know a couple of people who are trying to get makerspaces going here, and resources like that are golden.
Yes, definitely. We are going to have the website is going to be called makingandslearning.org. It's under construction right now, but once it's live, we're going to have a website, a downloadable publication, as well as a MOOC that will take people through the process of our workshops to engage with the tools and with the framework. So it's pretty exciting. Things should be rolling out within the next few months. So yeah, keep your eye out for it.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Kylie?
Yeah, that sounds fabulous, Lisa. I can't wait to see that. We've been embarking here at the university on a project where we've been opening up our very own makerspace within the School of Education. And it's interesting at the university level, there's a lot of need for these makerspaces in terms of how do we think about and sort of reformulate higher education. But surprisingly, most of the makerspaces are kind of located in schools of engineering, maybe schools of business, but less often in schools of education. So we're really one of the first to launch these kinds of spaces. And so we like Lisa, kind of extracted some principles about how to go about this. And so the things that we found to be really important for learning in makerspaces ended up being being able to have everything out in the open and visible. And I know that was one of the early principles guiding sort of the MakeShop as well. So all of our tools and materials are visible. They're hanging on the walls. There's no cabinets cabinets. Actually, the whole hallway is actually pure glass, so you can see every space. So it was fascinating how the space actually has self-advertised immediately after it was launched. I mean, everybody's got ideas of what to do in this space. And for us, what it means to have a makerspace now in the School of Education is how do we reposition teachers not as consumers of all of these books and curriculum and materials that are put out there, but really as designers of classroom learning experiences. Everything that we do, from the positioning of our desks to how we frame the curriculum to the hands-on activities to our choice of materials, has an impact on learning. And we've known this intuitively, and yet so much of the discourse has really removed teachers from really being positioned as active agents and designers of the classroom experience. So for us, this is kind of a re-envisioning of what it might mean to be a teacher and sort of thinking about 21st century learning experiences. Hopefully, we're working to kind of put the curriculum in place now to have a new cadre of teachers and librarians being trained on these tools and materials, having our faculty actually start to teach in this space. For me, teaching in this space now merges my research interests with my teaching experiences. So I don't have to bring my demos to class. They're surrounded with this, and so they ask questions about the materials that are there. They can see the work in progress. It's also been a really great space because it's not just a space that belongs to my lab any longer. We've always had access to these tools and materials through my lab, but we haven't had a shared communal space. Now the shared communal space means that I'm able to share my research with so many of my other colleagues, and they're able to share their work with me, and it's creating a sense of joy, of happiness, of community in the higher education culture. And so it's just been really, really fun to kind of see this all play out. And then the innovations, the things that are starting to happen now are leading to new games and new electronic puppetry prototypes, all sorts of things that both the students and the faculty are working on. That's just really, really generative. So it's been a real game changer for us. It's been really fun.
Well, so to get a little bit into this, how do you get started in it? The idea of reframing learning for teachers around Maker Ed, is there a particular philosophy or way of, design philosophy, pedagogical philosophy that you frame for them?
Oh, absolutely. Well, for those of you that know me know that I am a constructionist, right? So I really adhere to sort of the Seymour Papert, Mitchell Resnick, Yasmin Kafai school of thought in terms of that we learn by making, and that orientation really engages us in high-quality learning practices as we start to go and start to rethink our classroom experiences in that way. You also know me because I believe very deeply in sort of the principles of connected learning as well, and so sort of looking at this intersection of connected learning and constructionism. How do we learn by making, but how do we use connected learning to really deepen those learning objectives and think about how do we make that openly networked, how do we share that work, how do we push it in so many ways that we know are important and transformative to that learning experience.
For me, I guess the most important design principle that I follow that has worked for me is having a shared purpose. And I guess in working in the TechHive, that's the main thing that I feel like I was always driving for. That I was we always have a shared purpose, and whether it was like a monthly push of like a new a new showcase on the museum floor, to like a Makerspace a Maker Fair project for the big Maker Fair that happens in San Mateo, or working towards opening up a haunted house for Halloween. That's what worked the best for me, and I feel like it really helped build the community and the camaraderie and the motivation, because once everyone knows there's that deadline and people will be waiting to see your work on stage, and then it just kind of gets everyone whips everyone into shape, and then and then with every finished performance, everyone just feels so good and they're ready for the next one. So the more shared purpose you can provide your makerspace, I think the better it will be.
I think that that aspect of kind of sharing your work as a kind of a form of publishing in the making world, and you're celebrating in the making, and there's some, it's very typical in architecture studios as well, where, it's also an opportunity for critique and revision and refinement to get better at something. Thinking about my design philosophy, I feel like I come in more from STEM learning, science, technology, engineering, and math. And for many years, we've been thinking about how do you support this idea of inquiry. So having children start with a question that's important to them, a driving question, and then what are the resources that you bring to investigate that science question? And then from that, it's very learner-centered. It's really centered around what is the student really interested in answering. And I think in the making frame, it's around what do they feel like they want to make, whether or not it's a specific design challenge, or it might be that they're really making meaning, or they're doing expressive making, aesthetic making. And so they don't have a particular agenda in mind except to maybe work with the materials, express something with the materials, or it could be they have a very specific purpose, which is around, making a water filter. We had this one student who was interested in harnessing the ocean's energy through some sort of floating ball system that you could throw into the ocean, and have the ocean waves get generated and captured in this. And so he spent some time building these cardboard balls. And I don't think he actually figured out the engineering of it, but that was enough for him to start thinking about and kind of tinkering with materials to think about kind of a bigger challenge. So I guess in general, it's sort of, starting with the driving question, and maybe starting with this idea of learner-centered design, is starting where the interest is.
How to harvest energy from the ocean is a great big question. Do you have any other examples of questions that motivated kids to do things?
Wow. Trying to think of some other specific examples. We had a recent project in the TechHive around building social robots. So being able to create this robot that would help communicate and be basically an explainer in the museum, which I thought was an interesting idea, because oftentimes the teens in the program were supposed to be facilitating, serving as facilitators in the museum, and here they were building robots to replicate what they might be doing themselves, which I thought was kind of interesting. AJ, I don't know if you can think of other examples off the bat. We had one kid who he was kind of more grounded. He wanted to build a way that he could quickly hang his clothes up, because apparently his mom would nag him with all the clothes that was in his room. So he wanted to create this hanger that you could quickly pick up and throw together. It was kind of this throwable hanger that could hang clothes, and made that prototype. We had another kid who was tired of, back to this, makerspaces are gorgeous spaces that you can lay out all sorts of tools. Some of the teens were kind of lazy, I would say, and they had wanted to get the same set of tools all the time. And so one kid made a tray, again out of cardboard, where you could have one cutting knife, one ruler, one straight edge, one pencil. And so it was sort of the convenience of, in the same way that you would get fast food, like you could carry it in a bin. That was his design. So I mean, there's a huge range of projects, but those are just some examples that I could think of off the top of my head.
For me, to the motivating questions that to get the kids making, I always look back to, I feel like one of the most successful examples in science education is the robotics competitions, and I studied it for a long time because I saw how engaged they were. I mean, I participated in one too, and I got super engaged. But then I also saw how, for example, in the finals, there was nothing but boys on the field, and so I was like, they're not doing they're missing something in this whole, getting engaging kids to be makers. And what I realized is that like these kinds of like bigger camaraderie events, like kind of like a sporting arena, or like a show, like it's either, like you need like a competition or a showcase, and it's up to like I think the educators of the Makerspace to kind of create those larger, I guess, prompts or like reasons for all the kids to kind of come together and work on something. So those are, I think, the big challenges that to like unify the Makerspace were the ones that like I guess drove the main, like the overarching arc of the making. And through all, like while we had that, all this like all these smaller like making projects came about like organically. So
Lisa, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about this philosophy, design philosophy, pedagogy, framing it for teachers question.
Yeah, I think for us, a lot of that comes through the design of the space, the design of activity, and the design of facilitation that happens in our space. As Kylie mentioned, everything is kind of out there in the MakeShop. The material is there for visitors to touch. The materials are there for them to see. Some of them you can reach. Some of them are harder to reach, as they should be. And so, yeah, kind of that visual interest really, I think, is the initial invitation for anyone coming into the MakeShop, and then from there, it's the facilitators that really make the magic happen through the ways they guide people through the making process, the ways they invite visitors into the making process. It's a social space, so the way the space is designed, people that are engaged in making invite more people to be engaged in making just by sitting down around a table together. Strangers become collaborators. Yeah, and then the design of the activity itself, we really do invite everything from playing with a circuit block that's on a table to creating, a garment that someone would take home with them. And any of that can happen within the space at any given time. And so, designing it to support those, high ceilings and wide walls, but as well as providing constraints where people who are just beginning can feel comfortable and supported in that process of learning. Basic skills all the way up to complex processes. Something that we take really seriously and we do in an iterative way. And so, but really taking account of the facilitator's role, the space, the way the space designed, the space's role, and the things in the space and how they can support that progression.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, since Lisa, you mentioned space. I mean, one thing that is true of making is you do need a lot of space. And one thing we tried to do with my kind of exploration with paper and cardboard was to design a set of robotic type activities or paper mechatronic activities using these Office Depot boxes to address this concept of, well, we had gone to Maker Faire a couple times and seen and built these huge projects, and then you have to figure out what are you going to do with these afterwards, and it's like the teacher's nightmare. Like especially if the projects don't go home, but you want to save all the expensive parts to reuse them again. And so we created these box theaters, these cardboard theaters, and in a stackable way that one can take materials as well. And so I think that one of the design questions is, do you design, make, and take, or do you design and disassemble and leave, which oftentimes happens at the museum, but you also have some incredibly sad kids when they have to take their project apart. Yeah. But they take a picture of it, they celebrate it in that way, and then they leave the materials behind. So that it becomes sort of a shared experience. I don't know if the others have had similar experiences.
Well, I know that Kylie's got a cardboard robotics kit coming out. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's been really fun. We've been looking at, we've talked a lot about tools and materials in space. And I think it's really important that, the way in which we design those tools and materials and space actually start to privilege and invite participation in a particular way. So they privilege particular practices, whether that's soldering or snapping or crafting in the process. And so as we've been looking at our research and kind of talking with kids and seeing what's successful and kind of like if you have a whole bunch of materials sitting out, where, how did kids gravitate towards each of these materials and why did they go in these different directions? And so just like we've been sort of extracting different design principles around spatial construction, so this idea of visible and openness being really, really important for the design of the physical space, we've been learning something about the design of actual tools and materials. And so, it's funny, adults will kind of think like Lego Robotics is a good example, that like if girls just had more experience with it, right? If they would have grown up with the Lego, then they would be in those Lego Robotics championships like you had just witnessed. And it's just because they haven't had enough exposure. And the girls basically are saying, I've had enough exposure and I don't like those tools. It limits my creativity. It's not the kind of aesthetic possibilities that I want to engage. I do not want, something to snap together to a grid and have this kind of boxy resolution. And so as you start to hear what it is that they say, that the tools and materials become really important in how and what they want to produce, as we've been talking about already this evening. And so one of the things that we found by studying this intersection of craft and electronics is it starts to transform what's happening at this nexus, at this intersection of electronics. So e-textiles is a really good example about how the crafting, it's not because it's girly, but it's because it allows for a lot of fuller range of possibility than what our traditional electronics toolkits that have attracted girls. It's also been better for learning. And so we've used some of these principles to look at craft and this intersection of what cardboard and kind of other materials that invite a broader participation into electronics. And we've started creating this new toolkit. We've got a link, so it's the Zero kit, Z-I-R-O, and we are just taking it to the commercial landscape now. This was our early prototype, was called HandyMate, so you might have seen us talking about that at some of the work. And so instead of snapping together or soldering a robot, you actually use sort of joint modules to put together through cardboard and use Velcro to put things together. So you can, pick up any type of recycling materials and start to assemble your robot. It also allows for more dynamic responsibility, possibilities. So, on a normal Lego wheel, for example, the center of it is already designated, and so the rotation is always in the center of gravity for that wheel. But the possibilities here with Velcro is that kids often put it right outside, of that center, and so you get this wobbly effect that has a lot of character. But you also, in the meantime, start to engage the engineering content that you need to learn as you start to construct the robot. So again, when you engage and allow for the aesthetic possibilities, you start to allow for increased learning opportunities. So I think that we'll post that link. But right now, because we're just launching, there is an opportunity to win a free kit. So definitely enroll in that. It's on the website, and I'm actually excited to get my first kits off the assembly line as well. It's exciting.
So that's ziro.io is where you can find out about that. So you've mentioned getting girls involved and robotics and crafting. Well, I have a group of people. There's maybe 10 to 15 people over here every Saturday. I've converted an old greenhouse into a making studio, and we worked on the pataphysical slot machine for 5 years before we started exhibiting it. And most of us are in our 60s, and we've got a couple in their 40s and 20s, and we had an 11-year-old girl join us a couple of years ago. She's 13 now, and she had rescued a bunch of wooden duck decoys that were being discarded and started gluing things onto them to make them attractive, and sold them in a store and contributed the proceeds to the Humane Society. She's contributed over $3,000, and so when she showed up, we recognized her as one of us and told her that she couldn't just come and glue things, that she had to participate in figuring out how to do new things like we did. And so one of our group has become particularly interested in robotics. And you can make these really simple robots with the I guess sonar detectors that will back away when they bump into things. And so took two of her ducks and put them on these robots and put them in a little table so that they move around the table, and when they bump into each other, they back off. And it's just, I think when people think of robotics, they need to think in more expansive terms than the old-fashioned kind of like the robots you see in movies. And cardboard in particular is just a great way to get things prototyped very, very quickly.
So my main reason why I like cardboard is that you can color it, and which makes it endlessly decoratable. Yeah, like you were saying, I think decorating is such an important part of making, and it's something that I guess I didn't realize that when I first started doing maker education. But once I realized how like decoratable I guess cardboard is, like I'd much rather go to the cardboard. Using cardboard as a material than going to Legos, because Legos are just like you don't want to destroy Legos, right? Because they're expensive, and and there's only so many Legos that you can use. But cardboard is free; like you can get it from the trash can. Like, we all have cardboard, so I really love how decoratable it is.
Howard, you mentioned something I thought was really interesting, is that you had recognized that there was potential in this girl, and you saw a pathway for leveling up her skills and interest into perhaps areas that she was probably not comfortable with or wasn't maybe interested in going in, which is a sign of a really great facilitator in a making space where there's a lot of listening, there's a lot of parallel play. The best facilitators will not necessarily direct things, but they may leave different tools really in close proximity to a learner that they might pick it up or show some examples. And then, gently suggest, where they might be interested in, where there might be kind of fear or anxiety or kind of not confidence in pursuing that area.
Well, we just stumbled into this ourselves, and I guess you could say it's a kind of a combination of look what I figured out how to do and peer learning. So we conceived of these projects, and somebody has to figure out how to make the wooden structure. And if you're not an experienced woodworker, it's a little funky the first time. And so then when somebody else wants to make something wooden, then the person who plunged into that can kind of share their what they learned about what not to do. And then meanwhile someone else is figuring out the electronics, where we hit kind of a wall with the electronics. So what we did was we drew somebody in who really knew about that. So there's sort of an overall plan about where we want to go, but a lot of it is just looking at what that person in the corner is doing and asking them, how can I do that myself? Like we all make these hats that have things with lights on them and microphones on them, and you kind of want to make somebody makes a really cool hat, you want to make one too. So I think you would call that peer learning and kind of, I don't know what you call it, apprenticeship kind of learning. You all come from an education background. We're just kind of tinkerers who have learned how to do that, but it's really, we don't want to go to school. None of us want to go to school, including the 11-year-old girl. It's not going to school. It's, oh, look, that's cool. How do I do that?
Well, I think that making has a great possibility of describing what you just said, incredible starting points, and adding a little more creativity and personalization in the classroom with projects that they can learn. So I just feel like there's a great potential there. But there's something else that you had mentioned I thought was really interesting, which is something we struggle with, is how much of making do we black box and get components versus having them do everything themselves? For example, we've went through this exercise of starting with, well, maybe we should use Arduino and an Arduino programming language, and then we said, well, that it has particular affordances, and the language is not that easy to learn, and then we said, well, there's another board for robotics called the Hummingbird Kit, which you don't need soldering, and you can easily plug things in, and you don't need breadboarding, and some people really enjoy breadboarding with electronics, but by removing that out of the process, it facilitates other forms of creativity. But as educators and educator makers, you have to figure out what are the skills and practices that you'd like to foster, and what are the things that maybe you don't want to be carving wood to make your duck, and you do have an expert over here and you can grab a duck hole and start there. That's sort of kind of the push and pull depending on kind of the age of the kids. For our high school students, we found that being able to give them the option of, if you want to program in Arduino, great, you can do this in Scratch, a block visual programming language, which is open source. And then it turns out the Hummingbird also comes with a language called, I'm going to get this wrong, AJ, it's a Create Visual, or Visual Create.
I think it's like Create Lab Visual Programming block,
yes, which
something like that.
Tom Lowers created. It came out of his dissertation at Carnegie Mellon. And it's really designed for much younger kids, elementary school kids, to be able to begin to be empowered to do programming by some simple controls, and kind of get started in that way. So I feel like this idea of free choice is really important for kids, and which is really important in learning to make.
Well, that raises a question of what kind of learning are kids doing when they're making?
Yeah, real quick though, I actually wanted to point out something else that you said, Howard, that I thought was so wonderful, that I think is quintessential as part of creating a generative context for learning through making, is that everybody in your posse is on equal footing. Everybody is a learner, everybody is a maker, everybody is an expert in something, and is looked to by others in that way. And so I just think that too is like one of the most, and something that we really value in MakeShop, as far as the people that are on our facilitation team, and the way in which we think about someone as young as 4, or their grandmother, or their father. These are really important stances to take towards people, and sometimes they're really hard when it comes to putting making in the classroom, where teachers are expected to be.
Oh, okay. I think we lost Lisa. She may have to leave and come back. But I'm going to finish her sentence for her. Teachers are expected to be the experts, but increasingly there's some kid in your class who may probably know more than you do, and I just think it's hugely powerful. And when I taught college students things about how to use social media, I always tried to ask the other teachers which one of these students who's coming into my class knows more than I do, and then take them out to lunch and get them to tell me what I need to include before the course starts.
Yeah. I guess I would like to echo that it's really important to build that trust with your members of the Makerspace. I guess I do that 2 ways. There's 2 techniques that I use to build the trust with my makers. One is at the end of the day, we do like a debriefing session. We call it like a plussing session, and we go around in circle and we share things that went well, so the pluses, and then instead of the minuses, we call it the deltas, which are change in math. And so we ask everyone to include what's one way that we can improve this project, I guess. And that's something that we do almost every time we meet. So much so that it becomes it's expected of them, and they just know at the end of the day, oh, we're going to do a plussing session, and that really helps bring democratize the knowledge out there. And then the other thing, the second technique I use is once I realize one of our makers is becomes somewhat of an expert, I always point to them when other makers have questions. So it's so instead of coming to me for questions, I was like, she knows over there. Go ask her, and she can tell you. So the whole peer learning is really important, and I make sure that I don't answer the questions to undercut, so that I don't undercut, my other makers who do know it. So.
Kylie, I suspect that you have something to say about that question of what are kids learning when they're making.
Yeah, I mean, what are they not learning is the question, right? It is, this is, making is just such a holistic activity that I think part of the challenge for us, that are interested in learning in makerspaces is there's so many viewpoints on what that learning could be, in terms of collaboration, in terms of envisioning, in terms of the design process, in terms of STEM learning, in terms of arts learning. So that as many frameworks as you could possibly have, and I think that this is sort of why as fun as making is, everybody can be a maker. Whether you're crafting something and doing something low tech or something extremely high tech, whether you're working in the car industry, whether you're kind of doing something to shoot into outer space, right? It's a unifying way to start to bring in our curriculum and start to make it very interdisciplinary and holistic. And we've oftentimes framed universities and schools in very isolated fashions. We thought about literature and writing as separate from science and separate from foreign language learning, which is separate from how we train people in fine arts. And so the thing about makerspaces is it's kind of like part science studio, part art studio, and a mix of all of these other things. And so there's a little something in there for everyone. So depending on what you're making, what you're doing, there's people studying, certainly STEM is well known just because of the way policy leanings are nationally, but the engineering pieces people are studying, the computational thinking people are studying, math. We have a new project looking at sort of the connections between math and craft, for example, and thinking about the history of computers is actually being kind of derived from the Jacquard loom and weaving. You've got other folks that have been looking at kind of what do you learn about aesthetics and about the arts, and as you're engaging, lots of people studying collaboration. So the list kind of goes on and on, which is both the affordance of this and the limitation is that as we start to communicate out what people learn, it's a complex landscape. So I think depending on our lenses, depending on how these makerspaces are constructed, what's being engaged, there's as many learning outcomes as we have, different kinds of makes.
I would add problem solving, particularly. For me, I've been a writer and a teacher, and I live in a fairly abstract world most of my life. And recently I've gotten ideas about things I want to make. And so how do you do it? And you get an idea of how do you do it, and usually it doesn't work. You have to solve the problem. And I was never very interested in engineering. It didn't seem very interesting to me for most of my life, but now I understand, engineering is how do you get this thing that you have in your head to something that you can hold in your hand, and that works, that does what you want it to do. And boy, learning that things don't work and that you can figure out how to make them work has been really big for me in my old age.
I guess if I had to answer that question of what are kids learning, I think there's a measurement question in there as well of what do people hope they measure learning for? And so I think if we just look at learning by itself, when Kylie mentioned that there's so many different things that they are learning that are valuable. It's not just learning knowledge and gaining skills and practices, but there's a lot of other things, which I'm going to put in the bin of tacit knowledge. They're learning how to be resourceful. They're building social capital with peers and other people who have skills that they don't have. They're learning how to get along with people. They're gaining confidence, and sometimes they're learning, important lessons about grit and persistence, and failure in the face of problem solving. But these things are really difficult to measure and oftentimes aren't valued, I would say, in a lot of school settings, or I would say, yeah, formal educational settings. And so I think that, making is going to be maybe at risk if, there isn't this discussion around, what is it that we value in kids? What do we value in learning, and what we would like them to learn? Because what's going to happen is that making eventually is going to replace other things that the kids might be doing. And so I think people are going to have to make a choice of, do you send your child to tutoring, or do you send them to a maker session? I don't think we've gotten there yet, but I kind of predict in the next 3 to 5 years that I think parents are going to be faced with that challenge as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, just that I agree that I have a little bit of an echo. That it's an approach to learning rather than necessarily an outcomes-driven, thought about what learning people are achieving. At least that's the way that we've approached it in the MakeShop. We've really, when we think about learning, what we've done is we've brought together the staff of MakeShop, the teaching artists, and then the research team at our museum, and we've looked to see what are the practices, what are the sort of actions, the behaviors, the things in process that we believe are kind of the lens through which these outcomes might be achieved, that people are engaging in. So things like tinkering, like engaging in inquiry, seeking out and sharing social and material resources, these sorts of things that we can identify and design to support. So in doing that together, we've really created a language for learning that has shaped the way the practitioners, the teaching artists, design to support these things. They use it when they're talking to one another, which is really exciting, and we can then find ways to then measure it. So it's exciting, and it's less of an outcomes-based approach and more of a lens through which you look to achieve outcomes that then can be relatable to other people's interests, like schools and funders and things like that. So it doesn't discount things like STEM outcomes, but it provides you, a maker-based lens through which to achieve those things.
Can you say something in that language for us?
Say something in that language? Well, like I said before, there's a white paper that should be a link in the resources of this webinar. People can read and find out more about those practices and how we, and examples of them, and how we have modified some of the experiences in MakeShop to better support learning by using those practices. So, ooh, I can't hear you.
What's the name of that white paper?
I think it's called. It is called. Well, it's about the learning practices of MakeShop, and I think it has a longer name than that because everything that's semi-academic has a very long name. But but it's on the MakeShop website, and there should be the learning practices of making an evolving framework for design. So that's the name of the white paper.
I was thinking, since we're speaking about making, I thought maybe Kylie might want to put a plug in for an upcoming book that's going to be released soon called Mycology.
Yeah, that's true, because it's involving all of you. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so we have a 2-book series coming out. We've been trying to gather all of the, basically the learnings, the understandings about these spaces, the research is just burgeoning, and so we've brought this under, the umbrella, these two volumes on learning about making, so the Makeology series. So this is coming out through Routledge in actually just a couple of months. So we're just doing the final page proofs now, and should be hitting the bookstores here pretty soon. I believe actually the links are already up on Amazon too, so which is exciting.
Wonderful. I think that the archive of this is going to be a very rich resource for people who are getting started with their making maker spaces.
I also wanted to point out that there are a number of really great resources on the Maker Ed website. There's I'm forgetting the specific name of the book it's a maker handbook of how to start up maker spaces with some basic tools. I think these are all free resources that you can get at Maker Ed.
Is that makered.org or makered.com? Makered.org?
I think it's .org, yeah.
Yeah, and they've done the Makerspace playbook. There's been rich resources in terms of, if you're wondering, building a makerspace is challenging. Somebody equated it to kind of doing a high-end kitchen when you start with not even having like a spoon, right? so how what do you order from everything from cotton balls to the hummingbird kits to the laser cutter? How do you even put this list in the supply order? And you're probably bound to drive some people crazy as they try to put all of the invoices together for all of this making. But it's well worth the effort. But the tools and materials that are available out there through all of these folks really make that easier. They've also got a lot of resources around supporting practices like tinkering, to think about the pedagogy that should be guiding that space as well as if you're interested in portfolios, a really nice open portfolio report that we worked with them on that's available on the Maker Ed site as well.
I don't know, AJ, if you remember this, but when we started the TechHive with support from the Institute for Museum Library Services through their Learning Labs program, we bought a handful of Makey-Makeys and we had paper and glue sticks.
That's all we got.
I think that was it. And I actually had some aluminum foil because we actually couldn't afford to buy proper connectors. And so I feel like you can really start anywhere as long as you have the attitude, right? Great people, great volunteers, but also the attitude that you can be creative with lots of really simple materials, and you don't necessarily need a laser cutter. We actually did a lot of cutting with X-Acto blades, and unfortunately our lessons turned into cutting. Yeah, so we have some incredible crafters now, and we would love to have a laser cutter, but you can do quite a bit of making with some really basic things that you can get at a local craft store, and also at your if you go dumpster diving at a local hardware store, you can also get a lot of materials as well.
Another thing we did, like one of the first projects we all did, was we focused on beautifying our space, because we pretty much just got an empty amphitheater, and they're like, here, this is the TechHive, and this is your staff, there's me and another guy, and then these are your volunteers, and and here's some makey-makeys. So what we did was instead of focusing on buying big equipment and all that, we just focused on beautifying the space. So we made a giant sign that said TechHive, and it lit up in LEDs, and just by doing that, it really everyone just kind of bought into it, because they literally helped build the space. So I was really happy that we took that approach to making our makerspace. It was not the fancy build a really design a really pretty space. It was more make it accessible, and then make sure we have a strong community, and then from the community everything will grow.
Lisa, you could.
Yeah, I would just emphasize people over stuff. That's always my mantra, is staff over stuff. Knowing that if you have the right people, the passionate people behind the practice, it's that's really the most essential ingredient in making a successful learning environment. So that's all.
Well, thanks everyone. That went quickly. Thanks for a great conversation, which will be, I think, a wonderful resource. I've collected all kinds of resources for myself and my friends here. So this wraps up the third webinar of our January 2016 series on Maker Educators. Please feel free to keep the energy going on Twitter using the hashtag connectedlearning. There will be a full video recording of this webinar available almost immediately, in a few minutes, on connectedlearning.tv with other curated content on the way, probably in a couple of hours. All of these links will be on that same page. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with your networks. And if you'd like to know about more upcoming webinars and conversations from Connected Learning TV, which is now produced by the National Writing Project's Educator Innovator, please visit educatorinnovator.org and sign up for the email newsletter. So join me next week at the same time for our final conversation of this series on making learning in different settings. So thanks again, everyone. I definitely will be in touch.
Thanks, Howard.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.